The rock sample cracked clean down the middle, just like Nora knew it would. She had pressed the split tool along the fault line she spotted 3 minutes ago, a thin gray seam running diagonal across the surface, barely visible unless you knew what you were looking for. She knew. She always knew. Growing up in Trench Colony 7 meant learning to read rock the way other children learned to read words. The walls talked. You just had to be quiet enough to listen. She set the two halves down on her tray, logged the fracture angle, and moved to the next sample. The geological bay was small and smelled like metal and mineral dust. She liked it that way. It was the only room on the gas Resolute that felt like home. Outside the bay door, two Tharaki engineers were arguing about the cargo lift again. Their voices were deep and rough, like stones rolling against each other. She had learned to tune them out after the first week. Most sounds on this ship were background noise now. The hum of the engine, the occasional bark of Commander Drawl giving orders, the clicking rhythm of Sova moving through the corridors at twice the speed anyone else bothered to walk. Sova passed the open door. She glanced in, the way she always did, quick and automatic, like checking a room out of habit rather than interest. Her compound eyes paused on Nora for a moment. Then she leaned slightly toward the Tharaki engineer beside her and said something low. The engineer made a sound that passed for a laugh in his species. Nora did not look up from a sample. She had heard the word they used for her. Not in any language she grew up with, but she had been on the Resolute long enough to know what Vekari body language meant. The tilt of the head, the shortened gaze, the way they glanced at her hands like they expected to find something missing. Small. That was what they saw. She was 162 centimeters tall. She weighed 61 kilograms. She had no combat designation on her crew file, no military training listed, no enhanced physical augmentation. She was a geological engineer, grade 3, assigned to the Resolute's survey division. In the Alliance crew hierarchy, that made her unremarkable. In the eyes of a Tharaki who stood nearly 2.5 meters and weighed close to 300 kilograms, it made her invisible. She finished the sample log, sealed the tray, and washed her hands at the side basin. The ship-wide comm crackled. Commander Drawl's voice came through flat and direct, the way it always did. No warmth, no waste. Navigation drill in 40 minutes. All crew to assigned stations. Section leads confirmed by chime. Nora dried her hands and pulled up the crew assignment roster on the wall panel. She found her name quickly. Kale's name was next to hers. Their assigned station for the drill was Observation Deck B, secondary level, no active controls, no decision authority. They were there to watch and report. Nothing more. She had expected it. She was not angry. She noted it the same way she noted a fault line. A fact. Something to be aware of. She closed the roster and began prepping her station for the drill. Kale came in 10 minutes later. He was younger than her by 4 years, taller by 15 centimeters, and still trying to figure out how to carry himself on a ship full of aliens who barely noticed him. He set his kit bag down on the secondary bench and looked at the roster she had left open on the panel. Observation Deck B again, he said. Yes, Nora said. We're always on Observation Deck B. I know. He was quiet for a moment, then sat down. Does it bother you? Nora picked up the next sample and turned it over in her hand. A dense basalt chunk, heavy, smooth on one face, rough on the other. She felt the weight of it settle naturally into her palm. People who had never worked underground always underestimated the weight of rock. They thought of it as scenery. She had been carrying it since she was 9 years old. It bothers me about as much as the rock cares that I'm about to split it, she said. Kale did not fully understand that, but he let it go. The drill came and went. Nora and Kale stood on Observation Deck B and watched the rest of the crew coordinate the simulated navigation crisis with practiced efficiency. Drawl directed everything from the command floor. Sova moved between stations like water, finding cracks. The Tharaki engineers handled their panels with speed that was almost mechanical. Nobody called down to Observation Deck B. Nobody needed to. After the drill ended and the crew dispersed, Nora went back to the geological bay. There was still work to finish before the next shift cycle. She pulled the crate of core samples from the lower shelf, the heavy one that the two Tharaki engineers had needed to lift together during the supply load 3 days ago. She had watched them grunt and shift their grip, their wide feet bracing against the floor. She picked it up alone, set on the work table, opened the latch. Got to work. No one saw her do it. She did not need them to. The floor vibrated. Not the normal hum of the engine, not the low pulse of the corridor lighting system cycling through its nightly dim. This was different, sharper, a contact vibration, the kind that traveled through metal from a source outside the hall. Nora felt it through the soles of her boots before any instrument registered it. She stopped writing her report and pressed her palm flat against the work table. There was again a dull, directional thud, coming from below and to the left. Lower hull, maybe section 4 or 5. Not an asteroid strike. The rhythm was wrong for that. Too deliberate. 2 beats, a pause, then 2 more. Like something locking into place. She had felt vibrations like that before. Not in space, but deep underground in Trench Colony 7, when the access tunnels were being extended and the drill rigs made contact with a new shaft. A mechanical coupling. Something joining something else. She stood up slowly and moved to the wall panel. The sensor screen showed the standard debris field data they had been passing through for the last 6 hours. Rocks of various sizes, distances logged, no threats flagged. But in the lower left corner of the secondary display, a single orange marker blinked twice and then disappeared. She watched the spot where it had been. It did not come back. She opened a ship-wide comm and pressed Bren's channel. The Dorothi medic answered after 2 beats, his voice slightly muffled, as if he had been eating. Something touched the hull, Norris said. Lower section, port side. The sensors cleared it, but I felt it. A short pause. Sensors cleared it. Yes. Another pause, longer. I'll mention it to Drawl. Do it now, she said. Not urgently. Just directly. She closed the channel and checked the secondary display again. Still nothing. She crossed the bay and moved into the corridor. The main lighting was at evening level, soft and slightly orange. 2 Tharaki engineers passed her without looking. She walked toward the nearest junction panel and pulled up the hull integrity readings manually. Everything showed green. She stared at the numbers. They were correct. The panel was not lying. And yet, she thought about the mines. There was a saying in Trench Colony 7 that the older workers repeated so often it became almost meaningless until the day it saved your life. The rock does not warn you twice. It gives one small sign before the big one comes. You miss the small sign, you do not get to learn from the big one. She started moving toward the command floor. She was halfway down the corridor when the lights in Section C went out entirely. Not a flicker, not a dim, a full cut, hard and total, like something had simply decided that Section C no longer needed to exist. Emergency strips along the floor switched on immediately, casting everything in thin red lines. Nora kept moving. She heard voices from ahead, Drawls among them, sharp and commanding. Then she heard something else, a sound she had never heard on a ship before, but recognized immediately from a different context entirely. The groan of a pressurized door being forced from the outside. Underground, that sound meant a shaft wall was giving way. Up here, it meant something was coming through. She stopped at the junction and pressed herself against the wall. From around the corner came 4 figures. They were not crew. They wore dark composite armor with no alliance markings. Their weapons were already drawn, short and broad, built for corridor fighting. They moved quickly and without hesitation, the way people moved when they had done something exactly like this before. Vorith. She recognized the skull structure under the open-faced helmets. Wide brow, flat nose ridge, jaw that sat slightly forward. Mercenaries, most likely. The Vorith did not serve in the Alliance military. They served whoever paid them. She stepped back around the corner before they turned her way. Her heart rate had gone up. She noted that the way she noted everything, without judgment, as information. She breathed out slowly, the way she had learned to breathe when his ceiling started groaning and panic was the most dangerous thing in the room. Think. Do not react. Think. The mercenaries were heading toward the main hall, where most of the crew would be gathering after the Section C blackout. Drawl would be there. Sova. Kale. If the mercenaries reached them before anyone understood what was happening, the crew would be caught standing still. She needed to reach Bren. He was the only other crew member not accounted for on the command floor. She turned and moved through a service corridor she had memorized, not because she expected to need it, but because she memorized every route in any structure she spent more than a week inside. Underground habit. Know your exits before the walls close in. Behind her, from the direction of the main hall, she heard voices stop. Then she heard the mercenary leader speak. His voice was loud, flat, and completely relaxed. Everyone stays where they are. This will be quick and simple, as long as none of you make it complicated. Then, quieter, to one of his crew, find a rest. Check all secondary bays, especially the humans. They wander. Nora kept moving through the dark. Bren was already in the crawl shaft when Nora found him. He had folded his large body into the maintenance space above the medical bay with more speed than she would have expected from someone his size. His breathing was controlled, but his hands were gripping the edge of the access panel like he was holding on against the current. She climbed up beside him and pulled the panel back into place, leaving a finger-width gap so they could hear. "How many?" he whispered. "For that I saw. There may be more on the ship." Drawl. "Main hall. I think the whole crew is in there." Bren was quiet for a moment. In the thin light coming through the gap, his eyes moved the way eyes moved when someone was running calculations they did not like. "They will take the navigation core," he said. "That is the only thing worth taking on a survey ship. They pull it. We are dead in the water." Nora said nothing. She was listening to the sounds below them. Footsteps. 2 sets, heavy and slow, methodical. They were checking rooms. She could hear doors sliding open one by one down the corridor. Getting closer, she looked at the gap in the panel. If the mercenaries looked up, they would not see the shaft entrance easily. The panel sat flush in a section of ceiling that most people never looked at. Most people. The footsteps stopped directly below. A pause. Then a beam of light swept across the medical bay ceiling. Nora watched it through the gap. A slow arc, unhurried, thorough. The kind of sweep a professional made when they were not rushing, but not leaving anything to chance either. The light clicked off. The footsteps moved on. She let out a breath, so quiet it barely existed. They waited 3 more minutes before climbing down. Bren moved toward the door, and Nora caught his arm. "They will have eyes on the main corridor by now," she said. "We cannot stay here." "No, but we do not walk out into the open. There is a junction at the end of the service passage that connects to the main hall through the east wall access. They may not have found it yet." Bren looked at her. "You memorize the maintenance routes?" "I memorize all routes," she said. They moved through the service passage in single file, Nora leading. The emergency strips gave just enough light to see the floor. She kept one hand on the wall, feeling the texture of the panels, counting the seams the way she counted tunnel supports underground. 40 meters. Then the junction. They did not make it. 2 mercenaries stepped out of a side doorway and caught them in the passage. There was no gap in time, no moment of hesitation. The weapons came up immediately, and one of the Vorith said a single word that did not need translation. "Stop." They were walked to the main hall. The rest of the crew was already there, standing in a loose group against the far wall. Drawl stood at the front of the group, his wide shoulders tense, his jaw set. He was calculating. She could see it in the angle of his head, the way his eyes moved between the mercenaries without looking directly at any of them. He was looking for the opening. There was not one yet. Sova was still. That was unusual. Sova was never fully still. Her speed was a reflex, a Vekri constant. The fact that she was motionless meant she understood exactly how quickly she would be shot if she moved. Kale was near the back of the group. He looked at Nora when she was brought in, and something in his expression shifted. Relief, briefly, then concern. The mercenary leader was standing at the center of the hall. He was tall for a Vorith, but not exceptional. What made him noticeable was the way he occupied space. Wide stance, weight settled back on his heels, weapon held loose at his side. He was not tense. He was comfortable. This was routine for him. He looked at Nora when the 2 mercenaries pushed her and Bren into the group. He looked at her the way someone looks at something they had expected to find and found exactly as unimpressive as predicted. "There they are," he said. He stepped forward and addressed the room, but his eyes stayed on Nora. "The humans. I always think they will surprise me." He reached out and shoved her shoulder with one hand, not hard enough to injure, hard enough to make a point. She stumbled one step and caught her balance. He turned away. Behind her, Kel shifted his weight forward. Nora said his name once, quietly. He stopped. The mercenaries moved through the group with restraint bands, locking wrists behind backs. They were fast and practiced. When one of them reached Nora, he wrapped the band and pressed the lock. She felt it click, then felt that it had not seated fully on the left side. A fraction of a gap. Not visible, just felt. She kept her face neutral and her breathing steady. She did not move her wrists. She did not test the band. She just stood there and let him move on to the next person. Bryn leaned toward her by a centimeter and whispered, so quietly only she could have heard, "They will lock us in cargo and take the core. 2 hours from now, we drift forever." Nora looked at the floor, then at the mercenary leader's back, then at his legs. She was already thinking. The mercenary leader turned his back and walked toward the command panel on the far wall. He was going for the navigation core. She could see it in his stride, purposeful, heading exactly where a person would go if they knew the layout of Survey's ship and knew what they had come take. He had maybe 12 steps before he reached it. After that, whatever window existed would close. Nora moved her left wrist first. Slow, just enough to confirm what she had felt. The restraint band shifted. A full centimeter of play on the left side. The right side was locked correctly. The left was not. She did not rush. Rushing was how people made noise. She had learned that before she was 10 years old, working the deep shafts, where a sudden move in the wrong direction brought the ceiling's attention. She worked her left hand back through the gap in the band the same way she worked a coarse sample out of a tight rock sleeve. Patient rotation, small adjustments, no force until the angle was right. Her thumb folded in. Her palm compressed. Her hand came free. She kept both hands behind her back. The mercenary leader had 6 steps left. She looked at his legs. She had been looking at them, off and on, for the last several minutes. Not because she was watching him, because she was reading him the way she read terrain, the way she identified stress points in geological formations before they failed. He was heavy through the upper body, thick-plated muscle across his back and shoulders, the kind of build that made people aim high in a fight. They went for the chest or the head. They tried to match weight against weight. That was not how you brought down a wall. You did not hit the wall. You hit the base. The mercenary leader had a particular way of planting his left foot, slightly outward, more weight loading on the outer edge of the knee than was natural. Old injury, compensated, probably forgotten. He would not even be aware of it anymore. But the joint was carrying load it was not built to carry, and it had been doing so long enough that the surrounding tissue had stopped compensating effectively. She had seen the same pattern in mine support beams weeks away from failure. They looked fine. They held weight. Until the day they did not. 3 steps. She moved, not fast in a way that draws the eye. No lunge, no shout. She closed the distance in 3 clean strides, staying low, cutting the angle from his left side and slightly behind, where the eye does not naturally catch movement. She dropped to one knee and drove her right fist into the outside of his left knee with everything her body could deliver. The force came from her hips, her back, her shoulder. Not her arm. The arm was just the final piece of the chain. In Trench Colony 7, you learn to move weight from your center, not your limbs. Nora had been doing it since she was a child. The crack was not loud. It did not need to be. The mercenary leader's left leg buckled at the knee, and he went straight down. No stumble, no catch, just immediate structural failure, the way a support beam went when you hit the base right. He hit the floor on his side, and the weapon fell from his hand and slid 3 meters across the smooth metal surface. The room stopped. That half second, that pure, suspended silence was the only window needed. Drawl moved. She heard the snap of his restraint band before she even straightened up. A Tharaki in full tension could break standard issue bands through pure force expansion. He had been waiting, holding it back, waiting for the room to shift. It had shifted. Sova was already gone from where she had been standing. Nora did not see her move. She simply was somewhere else, and then a second mercenary was on the floor, and Sova was 2 meters away in a new position, composed, her small hands at her sides. Kale drove his shoulder into the nearest mercenary. He was not skilled, but he was committed, and in a space that tight, commitment counted. Bryn pulled the emergency defibrillation paddle off the wall mount, the one she had noticed her first day in the main hall, the way she noticed all mounted equipment in any structure she entered. He used it to block a weapon aimed at Drawl, not what it was designed for. It worked. The fight lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, 3 mercenaries were on the floor, and the fourth had thrown his weapon down when Drawl's hand closed around his forearm. Nora was crouched beside the mercenary leader. His knee was broken cleanly, lateral condyle fracture. He was conscious, barely, his face against the floor, breathing hard. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck and counted. Pulse was strong. He would live. She stood up. Drawl was looking at her. He was still breathing hard from the fight, his chest rising and falling in the heavy, controlled way of someone managing adrenaline. His eyes had gone from the mercenary on the floor to Nora and had not moved since. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. She met his eyes for a moment, then looked back at the mercenary leader. "He will need a splint before we move him," she said to Bryn. "And someone should check Kale's shoulder." She picked up the mercenary's weapon from the floor, cleared the charge cell the way she had seen it done in Alliance orientation 2 years ago, and set it on the nearest console. Then she waited for someone to tell her what to do next. Bryn put the splint on the mercenary leader's knee with the same careful efficiency he applied to everything. No wasted movement, no commentary. The mercenary did not speak. He lay on his side and stared at the wall with the expression of a man trying to understand how he had ended up on the floor. Around him, the main hall was slowly returning to something like order. Drawl had sent Sova to check the lower hull and confirm the mercenary's entry point. Kale was sitting on a supply crate with his arm across his chest, rotating his shoulder in small circles, testing what hurt. Nora was at the wall panel, re-establishing the comm signal they had lost when the mercenaries cut it. It was a manual process, relay by relay, and she was working through it methodically. Drawl came to stand beside her. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel the weight of the question before he asked it. She kept working the panel. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. She did not stop what she was doing. "Trench Colony 7. Earth. Deep mining settlement. About 4 kilometers underground." Another pause. "That is a geological station, not a combat facility." "Yes," she said. He waited. She understood he wanted more. She finished resetting the 3rd relay and moved to the 4th. "When I was growing up," she said, "the colony lost a worker about once every 14 months. Not always to cave-ins. Sometimes equipment. Sometimes medical. But a few times it was violence. Disputes over resources, over territory in the tunnels. There were no Alliance security personnel that deep. There was no one to call. You handled things yourself, or you did not handle them." Drawl said nothing. "My trainer was a woman named Doss. She was 61 years old, and she weighed less than I do now. She told me that in a confined space, size matters much less than position and timing. She told me to stop looking at what was big and start looking at what was weak." Nora reset the 4th relay and moved to the 5th. "I've been doing that ever since." Drawl was quiet for a long moment. His eyes moved from the panel to the mercenary leader on the floor, then back. "His knee," he said. "He had an old injury there. The way he walked. Same as a fractured load-bearing column I found in Shaft 9 when I was 17. Looked stable. Was not. You apply pressure at the right point, and everything that was holding it together stops holding." Sova had come back into the hall somewhere during this. She was standing a few meters away, not pretending she was not listening. "You were not afraid," Sova said. It came out somewhere between a statement and a question. Nora thought about how to answer that honestly. "My heart rate went up," she said. "That is just chemistry. But fear that stops you from thinking costs time. Underground, time is what you do not get back. So you learn to let the fear run and keep your head moving anyway." Sova clicked her mandibles once. It was the Vekari equivalent of a slow nod. Bryn finished the splint and stood up. He crossed the hall to where Nora was still working the panel and began wrapping her right hand without asking. Her knuckles had swollen slightly. She had not mentioned it. He had noticed anyway. "The rest of us knew," he said quietly, wrapping the gauze in clean, even layers. She glanced at him. "Not the specifics," he said, "but I have been watching you for 3 months. The way you move in the bay, the way you carry equipment, the way you listen to the ship." He tied off the wrap with a neat flat knot. "You pay attention to things that most people on this crew stop paying attention to after the first week." Kale came over and stood nearby. His shoulder was sore, but not seriously damaged. He had the look of someone who had been turning something over in his head and was not quite ready to put it into words. Drawl turned away from the panel and looked at his crew, then back at Nora. He was a large creature who had spent most of his career leading teams of large creatures. He had a particular way of speaking to people he considered worth speaking directly to. He had not used that voice with her before. He used it now. "I underestimated you," he said. "I will not do that again." She met his eyes. "Thank you." It was not a large moment. She did not need it to be. She turned back to the panel and finished resetting the 5th relay. The comm crackled, and the signal came back, weak but present, Alliance frequency confirmed. She opened the emergency channel and sent the distress flag with their coordinates and a short situation report. For Vorith, mercenary secured. Crew intact. Navigation core undamaged. Assistance requested. The response came back after 6 minutes. A patrol vessel was 2 hours out. She closed the channel and logged the timestamp. Then she looked around the hall, at the secured mercenaries, at her crew, at the wall of stars visible through the observation port at the far end. Bryn handed her a water packet. She took it. "I still have samples to process," she said. Kale made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. She drank the water and waited for help to arrive. 2 weeks after the incident, the gas Resolute was back on its survey route. The Alliance Tribunal had processed the mercenaries at the nearest relay station. The incident report had been filed and cleared, and the Resolute's navigation core was intact and functioning as though nothing had ever reached for it. Life on the ship had returned to its rhythms, except that the rhythms were different now. It was not a dramatic shift. Nothing was announced. Nothing was formally changed. But Nora felt it in the small things, the way small things always told the real story. Drawl had begun asking for her assessment during navigation briefings. Not just geological data, the standard part of her role, but her read on the broader situation. Debris field stability. Risk waiting on alternate routes. Twice now he had paused mid-briefing, looked at her directly, and said, "What do you think?" She answered directly. He listened. Sova had started coming to the geological bay between shifts. Not to talk much. She would stand near the workbench and watch Nora process samples, and every few minutes she would ask a question. "What does that line in the rock mean? Why does that one break differently? How do you know where the weak point is before you hit it?" The questions were about geology, mostly, but they were also about something else, and they both understood that without saying it. Kale had stopped trying to prove himself to the Tharaki engineers. He was still new, still learning the ship, but the anxious edge he had carried was quieter now. He brought Nora a second coffee every morning without being asked and without making anything of it. It was just a thing he did. The Tharaki engineers had taken to greeting her in the corridor. A nod, a short sound in their language that she had learned translated roughly as acknowledged. It was not warmth exactly. It was recognition. It was enough. Then the outside signal came in. A Vekari patrol captain named Orith had read the tribunal summary and sent a direct comm to Commander Drawl. He wanted a first-hand account, not the written report, the actual account from the officer present. Drawl recorded a response in his quarters and sent it. Nora only heard about the content of it later, from Sova, who had listened to it through a wall she was not supposed to be standing beside. Drawl had described the moment simply. He said Nora had not moved like a person who was angry. She had moved like a person who was solving a problem. He said she had looked at the mercenary leader the way she looked at a rock sample, finding the place where it was most likely to break, and then she had broken it. He said that of everything that happened on the Resolute that day, the most useful thing any crew member did was performed by the person that no one, including himself, had ever considered a threat. Orith forwarded the summary to 3 other captains. Those captains forwarded it to others. Within 2 weeks, the incident had been read by crews on 47 Alliance vessels. The questions that came back were different from the usual ones. Alliance crews had asked about humans before. They asked about the emotional intensity, the way humans bonded with other species, the strange human tendency to protect strangers. Those were familiar questions, expected ones. These new questions were different. They asked about the mining colonies, about what conditions humans grew up in, about how long humans had been living in places where the ground was not stable, where the air was processed, where every structure was something humans had built with their hands because nothing else was going to build it for them, about what that did to a species over generations. Bryn found Nora in the geological bay on the day the questions started coming in. He set a copy of the incoming query list on her bench without comment. She read through it. There were 11 separate requests from different vessels and research stations, all asking variations of the same thing. We're humans, really, not physically, not culturally, at the level of what they're shaped by. She set the list down and looked at the sample in her hand. A dark, compressed piece of granite from the asteroid field outside, ancient and dense, formed under enormous pressure over a very long time. Under her thumb, she could feel the microtexture of it, the slight irregularity in the surface that told her where it had been stressed and where it had held. She set it down and picked up her stylus to begin writing a response to the first query. She did not know how to explain humanity in terms that would make immediate sense to species that had grown up on stable worlds, under open skies, in environments that stayed roughly the same from one generation to the next. She started with what she knew. She wrote, "We come from a place that tried to kill us. Not once, continuously, for a very long time. And we did not become harder because of it. We became more precise. We learned to read the thing that wanted to kill us well enough to use it instead. We learned to find the break point in everything, because everything has one, and knowing is the difference between being buried and being the one who keeps working." She paused, reread it, then added one more line. "We are still learning. We have not stopped." She sent it and went back to her samples. Outside the viewport, the asteroid field drifted past in the dark, slow and indifferent, and full of things that would break if you knew exactly where to press.